So the rulers of the Christian kingdom of Abyssinia, mostly located in the Ethiopian highlands, already had contact with the European monarchs of the Middle Ages. Embassies were sent and received from both sides, with Portugal, the Vatican, and even Russia having the oldest ties to Ethiopia. And Eastern Orthodox was introduced to Ethiopia with Russia, so yay. So in the 19th century, this mutual awareness became more formalized and more official in treaties and carving up the rest of Africa. So in 1841, 2 years after the installation of the British in Aden, or what is now considered Yemen right now, the first treaty was concluded between the British and the rulers of the present-day Ethiopia now. However, by the late 19th century, Europeans were actually hesitant to recognize Ethiopians as a sovereign member of the family of nations, to use more contemporary expressions. So during the period where Africans were generally regarded as in the period where Africans were generally regarded by the European politicians and even the academics at the time to be in the place of the uncivilized, Ethiopian rulers, despite their Christian faith, found it challenging to gain a place for their country at the table of the civilized states. Yes. Still, though, that did not deter Ethiopia, and still in 1884, Ethiopia's future Nengasku Nagaski, or Nigas Menelik II, signed a treaty with the British over their respective spheres of influence in the Upper Nile region, with Britain having Egypt, France having Djibouti or French Somaliland, Italy having Eritrea, and some Somaliland. I don't know if it runs that far. I do believe it stops near Rwanda, so I think it could run through Italian Somaliland or southern Somalia at this point. So in 1889, Menelik concluded a treaty of friendship and commerce with the Italians, the Treaty of Walaka, or the Traito di Lucelle, or the Traiotti di Lucelle, if you want to be boring, right? Considering these processes of Ethiopian-European rapprochement and Menelik's own expansionist agenda, historians speak of Ethiopia's success to have actively participated as the only African state in the partitioning of Africa, or the only African nation in the scramble for Africa. Liberia is a special case. However, Menelik saw himself as a monarch of equal standing with his European brothers. However, the Italians interpreted the Treaty of Wallachia to have established an Italian protectorate, right, over Ethiopia, an interpretation Menelik actually disputed. As in the original clause, this is actually a common tactic in colonialization and colonial Africa as a whole. The rulers and the tribes of one state would actually get in their official language, so say the Somalis would get it in, I don't know, like Islam, Arabic, and probably the treaty would be signed in English or something like that. So while it is kind of true, there's always a secret clause in the official protectorates clause, so Belgium, Italian, French, what have you. Who wants to have the colony, right? So there's always this little trick. So always keep that in mind if you're doing colonial history. There's one paper which has the official language of the country, the African country, and the official language of the other country, because of course I don't hear a lot of English people speaking Adamic, so excusable, but always is a secret clause on page 4, paragraph 4, article BA of section 94C. So when in 1896 the Italians felt sufficiently strong enough to compel the rebelling protectorate into their colonial order and their sphere of influence and into a full-fledged colony at this point, Emperor Menelik beat General Oresi Baretti in the Battle of Adwa on the 1st of March 1896. Following this victory and a treaty where Italy recognized Ethiopia's sovereignty and annulling the Treaty of Wallachia, following the victory and a treaty with the Italians recognizing Ethiopia's sovereignty and annulling the Treaty of Wallachia, Menelik followed a non-committal foreign policy. His goal was to strengthen his sovereignty. The principle of a government by ministers was actually introduced in 1805 and 1806. And to use the competition of his European neighbors like Italy, Great Britain, and France to Ethiopia's own advantage. Subsequently, Britain, France, Italy, Belgium, Russia, the United States of America, y'all, Germany, and later the Ottoman Empire set up legations in the new capital of Addis Ababa. From then on, Ethiopia was on the map of international politics, and Germany, in particular, tried to increase its political and even economic influence during the decade before 1914. In 1907, an Ethiopian mission visited Budapest, Vienna, and even Berlin. So war against Italy seemed in Ethiopia's interest, and therefore joining the war on the side of the Allies was seriously considered in Addis Ababa. So following the death of Ningas, or the Nigas, Menelik II of 1913, well, in 1913, sorry. Yes, 1 year before the Great War, the war to end all wars, right? Crown Prince and Regent Luigi Lucia assumed power, while opposing political circles in Addis Ababa, with different preferences regarding the European powers and who to side with. Struggles for influence or even aim at replacing Luigi Lucia was actually considered in his own court. When war seemed imminent in July 1914, it was also seemingly looking like the French and the British legates would actually outmaneuver their German counterparts and succeed in convincing the Crown Prince to support the Allies. Rumors had it that Ethiopia would join the Allied war effort out of their own interests in finally gaining access to the Red Sea and the Sea of Aden, at the expense of the Italians in Eritrea, or the Italians in Eritrea. Provided France and Great Britain actually declared war on Italy though. Since 1882, diplomatic ties to the Central Powers by virtue of the Triple Alliance was Italy's forte. Ethiopia would attack Eritrea as the Italians had also feared. So a little background, Italy was actually on the German team, and this is actually one of Italy's first, let me just switch sides. So yes, this is Italy's switching side memes odyssey. It begins right here. Also, there was a chip on their shoulder with their colonial possessions at risk because Britain was the ruler of the sea. There was also a lot of money given to Italy, and Victor Emmanuel was kind of a Francophile, so he married, I believe, Queen Elizabeth's granddaughter. So, not a lot going in his favor for sure. Shh, man be doing this with the bussy boy. However, as previously when war broke out in Europe, Ethiopia political elite attempted to follow a multilateral approach that fended off the pressures of the discrimination and discriminate acts against citizens of the warring states and warring nations, right? This on declared neutrality and the question of what rights and duties would entail for the Ethiopians remained disputed between the foreign legates and even the Ethiopian government themselves. Introspective by the fact that in 1914, Ethiopia had not ratified the Hague Convention relative to the rights and the duties of natural powers and the persons in case of war on land of 1907. The Hague is in the Netherlands, I believe. For example, from August 1914, the Allied legates actually exerted pressure on the Ethiopian government so that the citizens of the Central Powers in Ethiopia would be barred from using post offices, telegraphs, Addis Ababa's only printing press, and even the railway line to French Djibouti and access to the Ogaden. With the Italians joining the Allies in April 1915, all of Ethiopia's dreams had been crushed, but also all of Ethiopia's neighbors were now involved in the war and fighting against Germany and their allies. With the Italians joining the Allies in 1915, all of the Ethiopian neighbors were involved in the war fighting against Germany and its allies in, the Red Sea. The Ottoman Empire with its Yemeni colony and opposed to the side of the Red Sea. Yet in 1915 and 1916, sympathies towards the Central Powers among a faction of Ethiopia's leading political circles became more outspoken as the war progressed. The Central Powers hoped that the new front against the British in the Sudan and with Somalia, and not only with Libya with Italy and French Somaliland or Djibouti with the French, but also from November 1915, the Sununi, with the Turkish support, had launched an attack amongst the Anglo-Egyptian forces in the Suez. The Central Powers promised the Ethiopians not only their own attack on the Suez Canal would be successful, but also that Ethiopia could, after the war, keep any outlets to the sea that Luigi Lucia had conquered, aka Italian Eritrea, maybe even Somaliland too. The Germans even hoped that the Ethiopians could relieve Paulo von Lettow-Vorderweg and his forces and troops fighting in German East Africa, or the Deutsches Ostafrika. The Allies were well aware of Germany's and Turkey's plans to use the pan-Islamic conventions in the Arab world, and even beyond, against their adversaries and plans to use guerrilla war in the colonies, right? So in June 1916, the Turkish Consul Hamid in June 1916, the Turkish Consul Hamid Mazada Bey distributed leaflets in Addis Ababa, which concluded that the interests of Islam in this country concur with those of the Abyssinian government. There were actually rumors possibly fueled by the allies that wanted to depose Ligia Lucia from the first start, that the crown prince would convert or had already converted to Islam. Ligia Lucia affiliation with the Turkish council and Muslim nobility in Hara in the north of Ethiopia, but also beyond in Somalia, became a grave concern for the British and even the French legates and legations in Addis Ababa. Whereas the Ethiopian Minister of War favored a policy of neutrality, Ligia Lucia apparently gambled on his victory of the Central Powers to get that sweet, sweet Eritrean coastline. British diplomats around the world pressured for a more favorable attitude among neutral nations, especially those with Anglophile tendencies, towards the Allies' war effort. For example, it would allow provisions for Allied troops could stage bases, lend ammunition or logistical support, basically co-belligerent or even convert into a full ally. Considering the Turkish-German attempts to gain Ethiopia on their side, the Allied legates in Addis Ababa used their better access to the power brokers in Ethiopia around Ligia Lucia's cousin, Rastafari Monoki, or in the future, Haile Selassie I, Emperor of Ethiopia, as both cousins had claimed descendants of the Somalite line and Somalite dynasty. They had already been in competition and competitors for the throne for years, but when Rastafari initiated a successful coup d'etat on the 26th of September 1916 against Ligia Lucia, the coup was sponsored by the Allies and justified with Lucia allegedly conversion to Islam. However, despite charges of apostasy, the available evidence is in no way suggests a formal conversion or that Lucia gave up his Christian identity. Given that the Allied military dominance in the region in 1916, Given the Allied military dominance of the region by 1916, Rastafari considered the political leanings of the deposed crown prince, his cousin, towards Turkey and the Central Powers as suicidal for Ethiopia's independence. Subsequently, Ligia Lucia was actually put under house arrest, and following his escape, was put into prison. But Rastafari did have a point. They were pretty much landlocked, surrounded by all states, firstly by their main enemy, Italy, also the British in the north and the east, and even the French in Djibouti land. So under the new Empress Queen of Kings Nagusti Nagiske Ningas Zaatu, or Zayaditu, Empress of Ethiopia, a cousin to both Ligia Lucia and the new heir apparent Rastafari or Haile Selassie. Ethiopia remained a neutral country in the ongoing War of the World. The government consequently prohibited, in line with the Hague Convention, which they would finally sign, the recruitment of Ethiopians into the Allied or Central Powers forces of 1917. However, Ethiopian farmers were nonetheless able and allowed to sell their cattle and other meat products to meat factories in Eritrea, where provisions for the Italian army was very thankful for. When in May 1917 a small German party attempted on behalf of the German legation in Addis Ababa to cross the Red Sea in order to transport a message to the Turkish army, the French legate accused the Ethiopian government, after the Germans had been arrested in Djibouti nonetheless, of a flagrant violation de neutralité, or a flagrant violation of their neutrality. In July 1917, the Ethiopians under Rastafari offered the Allied legates that Ethiopia would break all relations with the Central Powers. However, but demanded delivery of 16,000 modern rifles and some other stuff, modernization as well. The Italian government, however, wanted some payback in the future, but right now, however, convinced the Allies that the Italian government, however, convinced the Allies that the neutral but friendly Ethiopia was more helpful than an additional but not necessary brother in arms that would make unlimited and unwanted claims during the peace negotiations in Versailles. Based on the strength of the sovereignty and the unwelcome sense of equality, Ethiopia's offer was thus turned down. Don't worry, Japan, this will happen to you too. So in late 1918, the Ethiopian government congratulated the Allies on their victory, but the German legation in Addis Ababa was not closed down because they didn't get the deal, right? So whatever. So in May 1919, the Allies were only provided with a lukewarm welcome to Addis Ababa's mission. So they would go to Rome, Paris, and even London. France was actually in favor of Ethiopia joining the League of Nations. However, Italy and Berlin still hesitated on the unequivocal acceptance of Ethiopia's statehood, opposed such a step. It was only in 1923 that the African state was admitted to the League, however begrudgingly. Here, Ethiopia continued to struggle diplomatically to remain its independence, and in 1935, it would be put to the test, and the last crucial test of the League of Nations would be that, well, it can't do shit. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. I do believe I was a bit short on some of these things, but I do believe I gave a lot of girth. I gave a lot of oomph to the product, so hopefully that is good. I'm not too sure how it would turn out, so hope you learned something. As long as it is not too fast and I don't slur a lot of words, we are good. So anyway, guys, I'll see you next time. Learn something. So long. Girls and guys, learn something. Bye-bye.